gentlemen. Yes, this morning we want to examine the role of religion in colonization. Africans have come to take Christianity for granted. They think it's a religion for the continent. It's not. It is a religion which was introduced in Africa by the white men. And the reason why they brought Christianity was not entirely for godly reasons. It was not entirely for purposes of taking Africans to heaven. Christianity was brought into Africa as a means to facilitate colonization. And that's the issue that we will be talking about this morning, to try and look back at how Christianity came to Africa. You go back to the 16th, 17th century. The 16th century, the Portuguese had about a country, Munumtapa's country, which had a lot of gold, which had a lot of silver. And the king of Portugal sent troops to come and investigate, to come and conquer that country in order to access the gold and the silver that was being produced in that country you now know as Zimbabwe. 1561, the Portuguese sent a missionary called Father Gonçalo da Silveira, who arrived at the Munumtapa court on the 1st of January, 1561. His objective was to convert the Munumtapa into a Christian, and as a first step of colonization. And for sure, Gonçalo came from India, from a place called Goa, which had been, India had been colonized by the Portuguese. And the missionaries who came from Portugal, who were operating at Goa, were called the Dominican Convent of Santa Barbara. And Father Gonçalo da Silveira came from that institution to come and convert the Munumtapa into a Christian. He succeeded in converting the Munumtapa. And that pleased the king of Portugal immensely. But this act provoked resistance from the local authorities of the local religion. Mondoro resisted the fact that the Munumtapa had allowed himself to be converted to Christianity. And so they revolted against the king, and the king was forced to declare a death sentence on Father Gonçalo da Silveira. But the point I'm making here is that European colonizers knew that in order to colonize a people, you first of all have to turn them from their religion to Christianity, which is the religion of the colonizer. And for over 2 centuries, the Portuguese were sending missionaries to Munumtapa's country, and it is Christianity which was used to facilitate the converting of the various Mutapas that came, that took over power in the Munumtapa kingdom. And through conversion to Christianity, the Portuguese were able to influence succession in the Mutapa kingdom. And Mudenge, the late Stan Mudenge, produced a book which is specifically on that, which is titled Christian Education at the Mutapa Court. And in this book, he describes how the Portuguese king ensured that the Dominican convent was using Christianity as the agent for creating conditions that were conducive for the Portuguese government to exploit the resources of the Mutapa Empire. Princes from the Mutapa court were taken to Goa, to Santa Barbara, to be trained into priests. And I think you will appreciate the fact that through that process, We had our first PhD in 1670 when Munumtapa's son, Kapararidze, that was the name of the Mtapa. His son became a PhD holder in divinity in 1670. And eventually, this young man, whom the Portuguese named Dom Miguel, became the leader of Santa Barbara in Goa. He became the vicar. So you can see how the Portuguese used Christianity to control and influence events at the Mtapa court. The children were taken to Goa for training. A lot more princes were trained at Santa Barbara. And the fortunate thing is that these princes did not find it necessary to go back to the Mtapa headquarters after they had been trained, after they acquired a qualification in religion. They decided to remain in India, or they went to Brazil, or they went to Portugal. They did not come back. Otherwise, we should have had Mtapas who were basically agents of the Portuguese government through training. The purpose of using religion as an instrument of influence in order to promote colonial interest is a style of colonization. The Portuguese did not want to introduce administrative structures in the Mtapa kingdom. They used religion as the means to benefit from the resources of the rich Mtapa kingdom. So you find that in the country that you know as Zimbabwe today, they did not build administrative structures. They also did not build schools. They built churches only. Schools were built in the part of the Mtapa kingdom that now fall within Mozambique. That's where they had schools, in Sena, in Tete. But the church was actually the agent of the Portuguese imperial power. And through the church, the king could actually intervene to direct the church what to do. Because there's a case which is quoted by Stermdenge of a prince, a Mtapa prince who was trained at Goa, but was sent to Macau as a form of punishment by the Dominican convent authorities. And the king was not happy about that. The Portuguese king was not happy about that. And he wrote a letter instructing the Dominican convent to return the Mtapa prince back to Goa and to treat him the way royalty must be treated. There are several cases which are reviewed by Stermdenge of letters that were written by the Portuguese king, virtually directing the Dominican convent on how to behave as they executed their programs in the Mtapa kingdom. So that I think is a very important aspect to note, that the Portuguese king, the Portuguese authorities were using the church to promote colonial interests in the Mtapa kingdom. And the other example I could also quote is that of Gonçalo da Silveira, who was the first missionary to baptize the Mtapa. When he was killed on the instruction of the Mtapa, the Portuguese king sent an army from Portugal to come and avenge his death. Of course, at that time, the Mtapas were lucky in the sense that the conditions existing, the health conditions existing at that time, there were so many mosquitoes in this region that most of these white soldiers could not penetrate the country. They died on the way. So the interest that the king had in missionary work is seen in that respect. He had to send an army to come and avenge the death of Father Gonçalo da Silveira. And it is also reported that each success, the achievements of the Dominican convent were celebrated in Portugal And whenever these celebrations were taking place, the King of Portugal, King John the Fourth, was present to celebrate with the missionaries. This, I think, is a very important point for you to realize that colonization chose religion as the first means to access the people. And for over 2 centuries, the Portuguese were doing this in making sure that they promoted their economic interests, accessing some of the richest gold mines on earth which existed in the Munumtapa kingdom, some of the richest silver mines that existed in the Munumtapa period. Through religion, they just used religion and did not want to be involved with the administration of the state. When they tried to control, of course, they failed, because these people, the Mtapa people, were great fighters. Now, if you look at that situation in the 16th and 17th centuries, and you come to the 19th century when the British decided to come and colonize Zimbabwe, they used the same strategy. The first people to arrive in Zimbabwe from Britain in preparation for colonization were not administrators, they were missionaries. I think you are aware that it is Robert Moffat who organized the first delegation of missionaries to come to Zimbabwe in 1859. They arrived at Inyati in Matabeleland in 1859. But the history before that is that in 1836, Robert Moffat befriended Mzilikazi, who was based in areas around Pretoria. And the other things that were happening at that time was that the Boers, who had previously controlled the Cape Colony, they had been displaced by the British, removed from the Cape Colony, and they were wandering in the areas around Pretoria. So Mzilikazi was also coming from KwaZulu-Natal after clashes with Chaka. And these two groups of the Boers and Mzilikazi clashed several times. And each time they fought, Mzilikazi was beaten. Robert Moffat then took advantage of that situation and befriended Mzilikazi and asked Mzilikazi to go to a country to the north, which is a very good, rich country, peaceful. This country belongs to Mambo, and he should go there, run away from the Boers, because they were going to destroy him if he didn't do that. So it is Robert Moffat who persuaded Mzilikazi to come to Zimbabwe. He did not come on his own. And to demonstrate the involvement of missionaries in preparations for colonization, what Robert Moffat did was to ask Mzilikazi to sign an agreement, a friendly treaty with the governor of the Cape Colony before he left for his new country. And in 1836, Mzilikazi asked his senior counselor called Umnovate, who signed the friendship agreement with the British governor of the Cape Colony. And this friendship agreement basically stated that Mzilikazi should agree to receive white people in his new country. He should receive them and protect them. Whether they are traders, whether they are missionaries, or any other visitors, white visitors to his new country, he should protect them and he should make sure they're comfortable. That agreement was signed before Mzilikazi left for Zimbabwe in 1836. And that had been arranged by Robert Moffat. So Robert Moffat, in many respects, was an agent of the British government. He was working with the British governor in the Cape. Just as much as Father Gonçalo da Silveira was working under the leadership of the Portuguese governor in India. So Mzilikazi came here because he had been persuaded to come here by Robert Moffat. 1859, the first group of missionaries gets to Zimbabwe, and it is received by Mzilikazi in the circle at Inyati. That clearly demonstrates the role of Christianity in colonization. And the other very important aspect is that some of the people who were working with John Moffat, who is Robert Moffat's son, who led the delegation to Inyati, are Charles Helm and other missionaries. Charles Helm, who was a missionary, became the interpreter of Lubengula when the Rad concession was signed in 1888. But what we now know is that Charles Helm was not just a missionary. He was actually an intelligence operator. He was being hired and paid by Cyril John Rhodes, because Cyril John Rhodes was paying up to £1,000 a year into Charles Helm's account, bank account in Cape Town. King Lubengula became very close to Charles Helm because Helm was a good Ndebele speaker. And unfortunately, King Lubengula did not believe that missionaries could be unfaithful. He had so much faith in missionaries. And Charles Helm had all the influence that he needed on King Lubengula. When King Lubengula was given the Rad concession, a copy of the Rad concession to sign, he asked Charles Helm to help him understand what the document said. And Charles Helm lied to the king. He said the document was a proposal by the British gentleman, Cyril Rhodes and Company, to ask the king to give them authority to dig for gold. And after they finish the exercise, they would close the holes and go back to their country. That's what Charles Helm told the king. And the king signed the document on the advice of Charles Helm. The point I want to demonstrate here is that missionaries were agents of colonization. And so when we look at these early missionaries, we should not be thinking about God, we should not be thinking about heaven. It was a process of colonizing the country, and it had absolutely nothing to do with God. They were agents of the British government. You also see various examples of why Matabeleland was targeted as the first point to introduce Christianity. You go back into the history of this country, you find that when the British came here, when these missionaries came here, the headquarters of the local religion, the Maori religion, was in Matabeleland, in Matopos, where you find a place called Njelele, which is the holiest shrine of the Maori religion. Njelele became the holiest shrine of the local religion after it transferred from Masvingo, the Great Zimbabwe. You read Matema. Matema wrote a book called Zimbabwe, Diverse But One. And in this book, Matema says, there was a time when there was a civil war at the Great Zimbabwe. And the administrators of the Great Zimbabwe at that time had a very close alliance with the religious authorities. And the religious authority at that time was Murenga. He is the man who was the high priest of the Maori religion. And then he was staying at the Great Zimbabwe. The holiest shrine then was a place called the Acropolis. But when this civil war started between two politicians, one called Togwa and one called Mutota, a lot of blood was spilled in the Great Zimbabwe. And eventually, Mutota was defeated by Togwa. And when Mutota was defeated, he ran to the north. And if you go to places around Gurube, you find a lot of Mutotas there. They came from the Great Zimbabwe. Togwa remained at Great Zimbabwe, and Murenga was not impressed by the civil war that had taken place. And he went to Togwa and said, "Congratulations, you have won your war with Mutota, but in the process of executing this civil war, you killed a lot of people. And so you have defiled the place. And I cannot remain here. I have to leave because according to the ethics of the Mari religion, you cannot kill even the smallest animal, the smallest insect within the precincts of the Great Zimbabwe. So I have to go." And he left and went to the west of the country to establish his new headquarters at Nchelele. Now, the importance of religion in the administration of the empire then is demonstrated by the fact that when Togwa remained at Great Zimbabwe, he did not think he could run the empire without Murenga's involvement. And so he abandoned Great Zimbabwe and went to build Kami, which is closer to Nchelele. This is what Matema says. And so this is why we found Great Zimbabwe unoccupied, because Togwa left to establish a new headquarters at Kami. Now, the white man understands all these things. He knew the history. He knew the influence, the extent of influence of the Mari religion. And so it became a target to destroy before colonization could succeed. And that's why missionaries targeted the area we now know as Matebele South, because that is where the headquarters of the Mari religion is. And you find that when they established at Inyati, the next step is that they went to Hope Fontaine, and later they went to places like Pandamatenga and many other places, basically targeting the headquarters of the local religion to kill it. So missionaries started spreading in the area that we now know as Matebele South, in order to make sure that they kill the local religion, replace it with Christianity as the first step towards colonization. Now, as these things were happening, Lubengula noted that Christianity was going to be a threat to the general cultural life of the Ndebele. And he actually decreed that being baptized as a Christian was a crime. And so the first 20, 30 years of the existence of missionaries in Matebeleland were very difficult for the missionaries, because in fact we are told only 12 Zimbabweans were converted to Christianity in that period because of the resistance that was being given by the administration of Matebeleland. In fact, if you go to Nyati, you go into the graveyard, you find a grave of Makazankala. Makazankala is a man who was killed on the instruction of the king because he had been baptized. So that's the resistance missionary got from Matebeleland, from the people of Matebeleland. They did not succeed in baptizing a lot of people into Christians. And that created even more hatred, greater hatred for the Ndebele by the missionaries. So when the administrators came in 1888, 1890, you find the missionaries who had come earlier were actually the main proponents of force being used against the Ndebele. They worked with Cyril Rhodes and his administrators, his colonizers, to disadvantage the Ndebele people in many respects. We find a lot of statements that are anti-Christian or Christian values, which were said by these missionaries. If you go to Mashona land, in 1896, the Chimrenga I war started. And 1897, December, it ended with the surrender of Neanda, Kaguvi, and many other people. Now, what we want to examine is the role of Christianity in the punishment of the people of Mashonaland. When the Chimrenga I ended, there were trials that were conducted. A judge came from South Africa, his name was Watermeer. And the people like Nehanda, Kaguvi, various chiefs, and so on, were tried. You go to the current Reserve Bank, that area on Samora Machel, that's where you had the court. And in that court area, you had three very important places. You had the court itself, then you had Father Rickard's area where he was baptizing those that would have been sentenced to death. They would be baptized here. And then the third station was the hangman. And so all the people that were tried and found guilty and sentenced to death were baptized by a Catholic priest called Father Rickards, who came from Chishawasha. They would be baptized and be given a Christian name. Then they would go to the hangman, who was in the same area. And Neanda refused to be baptized. It was just not Neanda, it was Neanda and other people. And then you find people like Kaguvi. Many writers say Kaguvi was ready to be baptized and he volunteered to be baptized from the beginning. No. In fact, if you read Father Rickard's writings, he will tell you that each time he tried to convince Kaguvi to be baptized, he would refuse and say, no, go to others, not me. And in order to be able to baptize Kaguvi, what Father Rickards did was to go and take his two daughters, one of them called Ziviri, who came and persuaded the father to agree to be baptized, and Kaguvi agreed to be baptized. We're just correcting history. And so there was pressure for these condemned prisoners to be baptized. And what would be the reason? In fact, after being baptized, you would be hanged. Father Rickards actually tells the story of the baptism of Kaguvi by saying, as I was trying to convince Kaguvi to accept to be baptized, we were disturbed by a thud that came from the hangman's area when Neanda was being killed. So that's how it happened. Neanda and all the people that were condemned to death were not killed anywhere else outside the court area. She was killed in there. Now, what is the purpose of insisting on baptizing a condemned person? That's where you see the role of psychology in religion and how Christianity was used to kill the morale of the local people. When you are a Mondoro in the Shona culture, like Kaguvi, then you are baptized and you are given the name of a thief. Because when Kaguvi was baptized, he was given a new name called Dismas, isn't it? Now, Dismas, who is Dismas in the Bible? Dismas is one of the two thieves that were put on the cross together with Jesus. Dismas is the thief that objected to a question that had been given by the second thief. This second thief had asked Jesus, if you are truly the Son of God, why can't you help yourself and also help us out of this situation? Then Dismas said to this friend of his, the thief, you can't say that to Jesus because we know why we are dying, but he doesn't know. So you should be a little more circumspect. Then Jesus is reported to have turned to the good thief, Dismas, and said, you have a place in heaven. Now, the point here is Kaguvi is a respected authority in the Shona culture. He is a Mondoro. And then you baptize him, give him the name of a thief. You want to make him cheap. You want to make sure that his image is destroyed completely. That is the strategy they used to remove people from the local religion to their religion, Christianity. Baptism means you are now a new person. You were a Shona Mondoro, a high priest, but now you have discarded all that and you have died after you have been turned into a proper human being, a Christian. So baptism had that message. So they used Christianity to destroy African culture, to destroy African religion, to despise it. And you see this effort being promoted by Cyril John Rhodes himself. Cyril John Rhodes is a celebrated atheist. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in Jesus Christ. He was anti-religion. But when he came here, he made all efforts to bring missionaries from South Africa. They came in various denominations, and he actually gave them pieces of land which were very fertile. Most of the mission stations that you find dotted around in this country were given by Cyril John Rhodes himself or by Jameson, his friend. Cyril Rhodes actually went to the extent of giving the Anglican missionaries £600 to set up mission stations in this country. But he didn't believe in God, he didn't believe in religion. So Cyril Rhodes used Christianity as a tool for colonization. He was very conscious about that. Now, if you research into those areas, the traditional importance of the areas that were eventually set up as mission stations, you will find old people that say those were areas that were known to Yera. Kuyera munokuziva. Inzvimbo dzaiyera zvinoreva kuti dzadziri nzvimbo dzaMwari. Ndo pakaisiwa mission station. In other words, the whole objective was to defile those holy places of the local religion in order to deal a heavy blow on the importance, image, and value of the local religion. So you find actually, when you trace the activities of missionaries throughout the colonial period, they were fighting the Mwari religion. And even today, when you go to church, what you find is that the priest will be, from the time he opens his mouth to the time he closes it, he is castigating the local religion. He is castigating local culture. When you listen to the priests carefully, they are saying everything that is African culturally is unacceptable. It's primitive. They condemn the beer that we know as traditional beer. They condemn the food, the traditional food. They condemn the practices. All the celebrations that Africans make in praise of their ancestors are condemned as ungodly. And that is what you do if you want to control, to rule a people. You don't rule a people when they believe in their own religion, when they believe in their own culture. You transform them first, and then you can rule them effectively. So that's what happened in Africa. Today, you find Africans are getting crazy about Christianity. In fact, since independence, the number of Christian followers has ballooned. There are more Christians now than there were during colonization. And I think the Western visitors to Africa are very happy about the performance of their ancestors. They see Africans doing things that are based on a religion that was introduced by their ancestors, and a religion that has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with taking them to God. But a religion that was introduced to promote white interests. No foreign religion will take you to God. You go to God through your own religion. And so, when Africans believe that they will they will resurrect eventually and go to heaven through Christianity, they must look at various aspects of our history. Christianity is the religion which was used by slave traders. When you go to points where slaves were being shipped across the Atlantic, the ocean, you go to places like Senegal, Angola, and many other places, you find that the structure of the building on the coast is that there are dungeons below, and then there is a room upstairs, which was the church where the slave traders, the white slave traders were preaching to their God, praying to their God, to assist them, to look after them as they cross the Atlantic Ocean, to go and sell Africans. It is very difficult for me to believe that the same God to whom these white slave traders were praying was also the same God of the slaves. For 450 years, the white man was abusing Africans, using them as slaves, and many more were killed in their millions. And if we had the same God ourselves and the white slaver, why did God not intervene? He is the same God who allowed the white man to come to Africa for another 100 years to colonize us and to use us as slaves. 5.5 centuries of domination by the white man, who had his own God. And Africans also believe that the same God who is the God of the white man is their own God. There is a bit of stupidity in that belief. I think we have to think realistically. I think we have our own God who was defeated by the white God. It's a more practical way of looking at the situation. But if I am now talking about things that you may not want, you should excuse me, but it makes a lot of sense. Now, just going back to look at some of the aspects that indicate that the religion, the local religion, was the enemy for the white men. You go to 1894, when white soldiers were killed by Lubengula's party at the Battle of Pupu in Lupani. I think you know what happened. What happened is that in December of 1893, Lubengula deserted his headquarters in Bulawayo. And the white soldiers followed. And as they got near to the Shangane River, Major Patrick Forbes, who was leading the White Party, asked Alan Wilson to check if Lubengula had crossed the Shangane River. And so Alan Wilson, who was the head of the team that came from Victoria, who was the leader of the Victoria column, went to the river with his team from Masvingo. And when they got to the river, they found that Lubengula had crossed because they saw a plume of dust across the river. Instead of coming back to report to Patrick Forbes as Alan Wilson had been advised, Alan Wilson decided to cross the river to go and catch Lubengula and bring him back to Major Forbes. He did not come back. And when sunset came, before Alan Wilson came back to Patrick Forbes then asked the leader of the Salisbury column, whose name was... sorry? Boro, yes. Boro was the leader of the Salisbury column that went to Matabeleland to remove Lubengula from power. So when Alan Wilson did not come back, Patrick Forbes asked Henry Boro, to follow, to go and assist Alan Wilson in any way he could, because he did not know what had happened to him. And Boro left with his people from Salisbury, crossed the river. Now, the important thing is that none of these two groups came back. They were all killed by the Ndebele. That's what we know as the Battle of Pupu. 34 of them were killed there. Now, the point I'm making is that when these people died, these white soldiers, their bodies were eventually taken to Great Zimbabwe, to the Acropolis. And I told you the Acropolis was the holiest shrine of the Malay religion. They were buried just below the Acropolis to defile the place permanently. What that meant is that if you have bodies of 34 soldiers of white people, the place would never be known to be the holy shrine it had been to the local religion. So these bodies lay there for a number of years, and they were only removed to go and be buried at Matopos in 1902 when Cyril John Rhodes died. The whole idea of putting these bodies there was to defile the Acropolis, to make sure that it is never known for being the headquarters of the local religion. And I can go on and on to give many more examples that demonstrate that the local religion was the enemy. If you go back to the murdering of the people who were involved in the Chimurenga One in Mashonaland, the people that were given death sentence were actually the people that had anything to do with the local religion. Mondoro, Madzishe, and people like that. Neandam, Kaguvi, Gutu, chiefs, and so on. Those are the people that were killed. The soldiers that were working for Mondoro Idzodzi, Vananeanda, were not killed. These are the people who did greater damage to the white men. They actually did the physical elimination of white people. And a good example that is often quoted is that of Masi. Masi, the great warrior, during Chimurenga I, came from the village of Wata in Mazoe. And during Chibaro period, he was forced to go to join the police force. And in the police force, he demonstrated that he was a sniper. He was very good at shooting. And they promoted him to lead the unit of the police, which comprises messengers that use horses and firearms and weapons to execute their duties. And so he was the leader of this messenger unit of the police. The other friends of Mashi, who came from Mwata, 8 of them, were forced to join mines. They were working in the mines. In fact, they were working for a mine called Alice, which is in Mazowe. And because of the lack of safety measures in these mines, the early mines which were being worked by the white people, one day there was a mine accident and 8 of Mashu's friends were killed in the mine, and Mashu was not impressed by that. And he resolved to fight the white people. He asked for permission from Mbuyane, and that permission was granted. After, of course, Mbuyane made sure that Mashu was ready for it, because she continued asking, "Are you sure you are men enough to fight the white men?" And Mashi convinced Mbuyane that he was a man to be able to fight the white men. So authority was given. And Mashi did a lot of damage to the white people. He and his people killed a lot of white people in Mashonaland Central, the area we now know as Mashonaland Central. But when they were tried in 1898, Mashi was not given a death sentence. He was given a life sentence. Now, doesn't that sound a little unfair? The people who did the killing are given a life term, but the people who were just the spiritual leaders are given death sentences. We don't know exactly for what reason, but our interpretation, which I think is reasonable, is that Mashi was less dangerous than Neanda, according to the interpretation of the white people, because religion was the enemy. You find missionaries from Chushawasha, Father Bus. You find another missionary who was also very reckless with his mouth, Father Bila. These are missionaries who, when the war became hot in Mashonaland, the British government sent an army from London. And as these missionaries were briefing these soldiers, they were actually advocating for all Shona adults to be eliminated. Let's just leave the small boys and girls who are below 14 years. But anybody who is 14 years and above, let's kill them, because these Shona people are not usable. They don't cooperate. These are missionaries. These are not the kind of people that will take you to heaven. They had a mission, and that mission was to introduce colonization. So, I think Africans have to be aware of these facts. God is not involved in all this. It's Christianity being used to promote colonization. What you observe today, like I queried a little while ago, as religion is taking a lower importance in Europe, as churches are being closed in England, in America, or transformed into bars, you find Africa building more and more churches, new denominations coming up. You go to Enterprise Road in Harare, you find new churches are coming up. They're coming up everywhere. We are told you cannot go to heaven unless you go through Jesus Christ. But when you look at the variety of religions in the world, And the fact that in most of these big religions like Islam, like Buddhism, Jesus is not talked about in those religions. How are those people going to go to heaven? Because they don't know Jesus. So they are condemned because they are not Christians. What about our ancestors who died before Christianity came? Are they also condemned? I think we have to ask these questions, even if we will be charged with, what do you call it?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy. But before Africans go to the extent of asking these questions, we will continue to be subjected to intimidation that makes us fail to think objectively, thereby keeping us mentally colonized forever. We have to be free to ask the correct questions, to promote our own religions, to promote our own culture, and not be forced to continue to promote foreign religions. You look at why Cecil John Rhodes is buried at Matopos, at Njelele. He died in Cape Town, and his body was ferried from Cape Town to Matopos to be buried there. And you wonder why he was not buried on top of the Table Mountain, which is a beautiful mountain. If you have been to Cape Town, you know that Table Mountain is a high mountain with a flat top. And its importance is that there are two oceans that meet there. You have the Atlantic Ocean, which is to the west. It's a cold ocean, very cold ocean. And then you have the Indian Ocean, which is to the east, which is very warm. And these two oceans meet at the Table Mountain, at Cape Town. Wasn't it good for Cecil Rhodes to go up the mountain and be interred there so that he could feel, if he felt too cold, he would turn to the east and breathe the air from the Indian Ocean. If he felt too warm, he would face the west and breathe the air from the Atlantic Ocean. The Cape Town is a very strategic point. It is also the end of the world. Beyond Cape Town, there is no land. There's no better place to be buried, because that's the beginning of the world. But Cecil Rhodes did not want to be buried at the Table Mountain. He decided he must go to Matopos. If you have been to Matopos, you find that Matopos is nothing but a series of rocks, round, more or less round rocks which roll over, going to the west. There's nothing exciting there. But that's where he decided to be buried. The reason he is there was not about the beauty of Matopos. He is there because that's where our religion resides. That's where Njelele is. That's where the spirits of this country are. And if he is there, he will permanently defile the Mari religion. So that's why he decided to be buried there. And we must also know that Cecil Rhodes had a farm near the Matopos. And during the time he was on his farm, he would go up the mountain and enjoy the scenery. And one of the things he discovered was a cave in which there was an old man who was sitting, a dead old man who was sitting on a chair. And when Cecil Rhodes saw this, he was very impressed and said, "This old man is dead, but he is watching over his people. When I die, you must bury me the way he's buried." And so Cecil Rhodes, we understand, is not lying down in his grave. He is sitting, watching over his people. And who are his people? It's ourselves. That's the role of his grave at Matopos. And I'm hoping that one day the people of this country will decide to remove that grave from there. And before that grave is removed from where it is, our spirits are not free. Our ancestors are not free, and therefore we are not free. The Maori religion was a big target of elimination by the colonial authorities. I think you know that when the war started, 1896, was it? When they killed the last Murenga, people like Benham and company, they killed the last Murenga there because they wanted to eliminate the influence from these spiritual figures. And during the second Chimurenga War, when the freedom fighters took Neanda from here to Zambia, the white authorities were scared to death. So we must know that the local religion has always been a threat to white existence in this country. Even today, if they had to come to recolonize us, one of the first things they would do is to look for Mondoro and so on and eliminate them, to make sure that they don't continue to exercise influence on our resistance. You know the role of the local religion in Chimurenga too, when our freedom fighters were consulting Mondoro and other traditional spirits before they operated in an area. Having said all this, we must look at other people who were previously colonized. You look at the Indians, for example. The Indians were colonized by the British for a longer period than Zimbabwe. But if you go to India today, you find that the Indians have returned to be Indians, real Indians, in terms of their culture, in terms of their religion, in terms of even the way they dress. They are Indians. They practice Indian culture, but they were subjected to similar conditions as Africans in terms of British control over a long period. Africans have remained colonial in their mentality, in their practice. We have abandoned our own culture. We have abandoned our own food. We have abandoned everything that is African as inferior. But the Indians have gone back to be Indians. These things are very important for nations to develop. If you have no culture of your own, if you are surviving on a foreign culture, it becomes difficult to develop. All the countries that you see developing very fast, countries like India, China, Japan, are cultural. They believe in their own culture. They eat their own food. They are proud of being themselves. But Africans are not. And that is a problem we have to attend to if we have to develop as a continent. These issues become very important when you look at it in that sense. We must make an effort to do exactly what our ancestors were doing. We must appease the dead. Tinofanira kuwisa na mweya ya vanhu vakuru vakashaika back into our homes through the processes that Africans have always been doing. We should not be shy to practice our own culture. Hazina problem kuinda kunganga, because that is what our ancestors were doing. We should practice African culture. You are better than a black man who says these are filthy people who lie. Because you go to India, you go to China, they have their own ways of doing exactly what we are doing here. And that makes them who they are. And they have the confidence to develop using their own culture. So Before Africans go back to their culture, to their own religion, it will be very difficult for us to develop. And I think to facilitate this process of going back to our culture, we have to review the crimes of colonization that still affect us, the names that we still carry around ourselves, the streets that still bear the names of people who killed our ancestors, the schools that still have names of people who became heroes because of crimes against black people. We have statues that still remain in our country which are inappropriate. We have to remove them, throw them away. Remove graves like Cyril Rhodes' grave. In fact, we should bomb Matopos to make sure that Cyril Rhodes and his lieutenants who are buried there are removed permanently. Then we become African. Then we have a mentality that is free, a mentality that is free from colonial influence. We're very happy to hear that government is thinking of changing the chief's uniform. And that is a big step in the right direction. We hope this effort will continue. Would you have any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for an insightful lecture. So, taking from what you were saying, you're basically saying that our religion and our culture has been desecrated. So in order for us to go back to who we were as a people, is there need for what we can call cleansing ceremonies, maybe to bring back the spirit to go back to where we were as a people? Thank you.
Very important point. Cleansing ceremonies are very important and necessary. We fought a bitter war with the white people and we defeated them. But during that war, there were a lot of things, a lot of crimes that were committed on both sides. It becomes necessary for us to have ceremonies that clear our conscience, that that appease the spirits of this country. And this is a thing that has been postponed for too long. We just must go back to that and ask our traditional leaders to organize these cleansing ceremonies so that we have a clear conscience. This happens not just in Africa, it happens everywhere. The white men may do it through wine and not through 7 days like we do, but they cleanse themselves. So it's important. Another question?
Yes, I also wanted to find out, as an independent Zimbabwe, what then is stopping us from removing the graves of people like Cecil John Rhodes from Matopos? Because I strongly believe that it is their existence that's there to defile our own African culture and religion.
I hope that one day those graves will be removed from Matopos, and not just the graves, but any other, symbols of colonization, symbols of oppression that continue to exist in our country must be removed. This helps in the mental process of changing orientation. I think government has done a lot in terms of removing some of these colonial symbols, but we have not finished the process, and we hope the process will continue. We can only appeal to government to take a shorter period to cleanse our minds, to remove the burden on our mentality, the mentality that says colonialism was good, because it was not. And as long as we have symbols like Cecil John Rhodes' grave, especially sitting next to the holy shrine of Njelele, we are committing a crime against our own ancestors, against our own religion. So I'm hoping there will be an exercise of removing these symbols very soon. Yes?
Yeah. Okay. As you said earlier on, in order for Africa to develop, there is a need to go back to our original practices. So my question is, what can we do to maintain and safeguard our own practices and cultural dynamics in the face of globalization?
Yes, globalization is a phenomenon which involves many people in the world. We are part of the world, and therefore we cannot run away from it. But that does not mean that we should adopt a new identity, that we cease to be African in terms of our culture, in terms of our religion, because globalization does not demand that from us. I think globalization simply means doing things together as the world in aspects where that is required. But when we join the world in doing certain things, we should have an identity. We should always be identified as Africans. We have a culture, we have their own religion, and who seek to promote their own, and not necessarily to participate in globalization as British or as Chinese. We should join globalization as Africans.
I understand that Christianity has become a common religion in most African countries, but there are some people who are still practicing the local religion. For example, people go to Matebelele in South, Njelele, for a rainmaking ceremony, China Isamvura or Uyacela Izulu. So they are not all that has abandoned their local religion practice.
I agree with you completely. Despite the efforts of the white men, of missionaries, to convert Zimbabweans from the local religion to Christianity, there are people who have remained honest to their religion. Even those that go to church, if you look at their behavior, in most cases, they go to church on Sunday. On Monday, they are brewing beer to appease the spirits. So we are not suggesting that the local religion is dead. No. If you look at the role of Njelele in our day-to-day lives, we still have communities that send emissaries to Mari at Njelele to ask for rain, to ask for fertility, because that is the role of God, to provide rain. If you are not fertile enough to have children, you go and ask for fertility and you get it. So even when we started Chimurenga, people were sent to Njelele to ask for authority to execute the war. When you look at the role of Midzimu in our second Chimurenga, we basically abandoned Christianity during the war. And we went back to our own religion, and it guided us to fight the war, and we fought the war successfully. We only got back to Christianity after we came back to Harare. But the full period that we were fighting the white men, we were not Christians. We were followers of the Mwari religion. So Mwari religion is a religion that we go to when we are in trouble. And that's what I'm saying, what I'm criticizing, that we should not only go to Mwari when we want to succeed in our wars with the white men. We should do it as a daily practice. We should worship our own God and do the necessary practices to show that we're Africans, we have a culture, we have a religion that we respect, and not just to go to it when we're in trouble. So yes, there are people like me who make sure that when I'm in trouble, I don't go to church. I have ways of telling my ancestors to assist, to intervene. And each time we have done that, we have seen the results coming positively. Yes, any other question?
Yes, right here.
Yes.
Thank you very much for highlighting on issues of changing names, because I believe that names have an impact, especially in our culture.
Yes.
They have a very, very big impact. This is more of a contribution. The government should not only end on streets and removing the colonial plaques and statues. Name change should just take place in anything that has got to do with colonization. Name changes to take place in every aspect in Zimbabwe. For example, I attended a school whereby they used a colonial name, Umvukwes, that was Mvurwi. So culture and names, they intertwine, and we should never leave it out. Thank you.
I agree with you completely. You know, there are schools with names like Cyril John Rhodes. A school in Gweru is called Cyril John Rhodes. Now tell me, if a child goes to a school like that, do you think he will ever be okay in his brain? Cyril John Rhodes School. You know, the names, just changing the name is very important. It's an important exercise that liberates the mind. So it's a very important exercise, and I'm very sure that government is looking at those things to make sure that we remove these names and put our own. You know, recently, Tongogara, Magama Tongogara Army Headquarters. And this process has taken a little while, but it's coming, and we are very hopeful that it will go to schools. It will go to police stations and many other places that need to change. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and next time we'll look at a different topic altogether.